So, we are now back. I hope everyone has enjoyed their lunch break and a little bit of sunshine outside. I am now happy to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, Kaisa Wendt. Kaisa has been working with mobile positioning data for more than a decade. Her main focus has been on developing methodological solutions based on concepts and definitions already used in different domains such as tourism statistics, mobility, and population statistics. Recently, she switched her focus towards strategical aspects of using data and how to build effective data strategies. Kaisa was a member of the expert group on facilitating the use of new data sources for official statistics that was active in 2021 and published its report, Empowering Society by Reusing Privately Held Data for Official Statistics. Today, Kaisa will speak about how the ways in which we tackle current challenges in producing official statistics pave the way for best practices in the future. One of these best practices is collaboration between official statistics producers and other entities, especially private, to leverage privately held data and use them to enhance our statistical output. To illustrate her arguments, Kaisa will talk to us about the case of the use of mobile positioning data to produce tourism statistics. The project was a collaboration between the Bank of Estonia as the statistics producer and Positium as a data processor and Kaisa's employer at the time. Thank you for your attention, and Kaisa, the floor is yours.
So hello from my side as well, or from the other side, because I'm one of those outside actors who is trying to get a grasp on this official statistics monopoly already many years. And I was thinking long and hard how to title my keynote speech and what kind of message I want to give you guys here. And I think today we face a lot of challenges, bringing together a lot of different actors with a lot of different motives. But at the same time, I do hope and believe that we actually have a very common goal, which is to have an understanding how can we pave way for the better future, how can we influence societies, influence societal actors in a way that we can actually say that we did our best. So that's why the title. And of course, I could, over a decade of working experience in this field, I could say that I have a lot of things that I could tell and talk about. But today I decided to mainly focus on 5 aspects, which are why are we even talking about business to government for official statistics topics. I try to bring in my own perspective from one such a use case, which is mobile positioning data, and how it is being used for producing official statistics already many years in some countries. I will try to then explain to you or give you a glimpse of what does it entail in terms of data access or processing constellations. And also, when we talk about privately held data reuse, we cannot turn a blind eye to building trust and gaining trust and finding balance while doing so. And as a request, I was also tasked to think about what are the skills needed for operating in B2G4S domain. So why we are even talking these days about data reuse, about privately held data, when we have already methods in place, how to survey, how to count different phenomena, and how to, methodologically approach it. It's a tough question to ask because the answer to this is because the world is changing. It is changing in such a fast pace that it's hard for us to really even, the term new normality has been used on so many occasions past year. It's not only the pandemic, but it's the electricity prices. It's how it affects our lives. I hear this term every day when I talk about my peers, and it's sad that it's happening like that. And because of that, it's driving the need for something extremely timely, something that's very relevant and accurate. And at the same time, we do not want to replace something that is already working. We want to enhance it. I don't want to say that this is alternative. I want to say that privately held data is sort of an enhancement for something that we already have in place. So for example, if we have, based on privately held data, a means for cross-validation, why not to use it? Because we don't want to get it wrong. We want to get it right at the first time. And if we can cross-validate multiple times with multiple data sources, then why not do it, right? More information, more knowledge leads to a stronger foundation. It's not more data I'm trying to emphasize is here, it's more knowledge and information that comes from data. Not all data will eventually lead to information and knowledge, but if we are wise, we can make it happen. And finally, I think, as I already emphasized, is single data source versus combination of data sources. So how can we, if we look at one thing and we see some faults or cracks in this thing, and we know that there is another thing that maybe can patch this up, so why not include several data sources to bring something to life? Use the strength of each such a data source and make it happen. So for illustrating this, I actually wanted to bring an example from my hometown, Tartu, which is actually the same size as the city of Pisa. And the city of Tartu was struggling with an old public transportation network. It was from the 90s. And obviously the city has changed considerably during that time. The bus network did not serve the needs for its users. And the city of Tartu decided to undertake a journey where they included, on top of several data layers that were publicly available, produced by official statistics, Good. This is yours. Yeah, thank you. So City of Tartu was including a lot of data sources, but two of those data sources were actually from privately held data sources. And why did they include that? Is because they really needed to understand how people move. What are the daily fluctuations, hourly fluctuations? And they started to add these layers of data to produce a framework, to produce suggestions of this new public transportation network that could potentially serve the needs for its users. And what happened next is actually they invited users into this framework to give them feedback. There was an application where they could say this line, I think, is not good, or this line is very good. There was also a public consultation for those users who did not feel that they want to dabble with this application. But it was important that there was a framework where this discussion actually happened. And needless to say, some of the lines that were really something that the data showed should be removed were dear to the users, emotional. They connected some emotional places for elderly people. So they decided to leave those in because people felt strongly about those lines. So the new bus network actually was born on this collaboration work, and it was really, really successful. We even saw increase in bus riderships after the COVID. It still kept rising, except the first wave. But the same thing happened actually to the bicycle network that was planned in a similar way. So here I want to emphasize how can combination of multiple data sources enhance each other. We don't have to teach the traditional ones. We can just invite something new in and produce something very, very, very good for the society. So one of those data sources is actually something that I've been working with for more than a decade, and it is called mobile positioning data. Mobile positioning data helps to capture people's spatial, temporal movements, behavior. We are really, really able to grasp how the city works, how it functions, where people like to go. We don't have to drill down into each individual life, but we can look at the aggregates. We can, on top of this data, we are able to actually apply methods where we are able to calculate home location, work location, where tourists go. And this data source has proven to be invaluable in many of the use cases Estonia has used it for. And one of them is actually already 14-year-long official statistics based on mobile positioning data. And this collaboration with Bank of Estonia actually was born out of a sheer necessity. There was budget cuts. The traditional survey was in danger, but the bank really needed the statistics. So they turned to researchers who turned to the company. And we had this constellation where Bank of Estonia was able to, through the Statistics Act, gather this data. We had a data provider who was able and willing to provide this data. And we had a data processor or trusted intermediary who were able to apply methods on this data and then forward this to the Bank of Estonia. The Bank of Estonia is responsible for the quality assurance. They always go over the produced indicators and they have a final say in what will happen and how good the quality is. But the overall methodological framework is actually developed jointly together with the University of Tartu and with this trusted intermediary. And what happened is that what they got is 4 times faster data production or statistical indicator production pipeline. They increased their sample size. They gained more insights. They were more cost efficient, and it was less burden on tourists. So it has been going on now 14 years, and it's a very, very interesting thing, in my opinion, to have this type of collaboration happening already over a decade. However, one thing that I wanted to note here is this term trusted intermediary, which should not be taken lightly, because if you are trusted intermediary, you need to basically apply same rules as would the producer of official statistics. You need to be transparent with your methodology. You need to have very excessive quality assurance framework. So it's not easy for these companies to be this trusted intermediary, but if you take it for yourself as a goal, it's possible. Now we can travel out of Europe to Indonesia, which was actually the second country in the world to start using mobile positioning data for official statistics. And they also had a problem. See, Indonesia has many, many islands. Not all of those islands have cross border checkpoints, meaning that they are not capturing all of the tourists arriving. And they had this assumption that we probably are undercounting our tourists. We are probably not seeing the real numbers. And if we want to get the real numbers, we have to undertake an excessive survey in remote areas, which didn't really feel like a way to go for them. And again, they started to think and search for other solutions. And actually, since this Bank of Estonia case was already going on strong, they decided to try it out as well. So discovered the collaboration model involved Statistics Indonesia, Ministry of Tourism, who was actually the one who was after those statistical indicators, the data provider in Indonesia, one telecom operator, and again this trusted intermediary, a third-party company, who was providing the method, the counsel, how to proceed. What they discovered was the cross-border survey was not so accurate as MPD, but also with MPD, we are introducing a lot of extra noise. So when the planes are flying over and people are using the mobile phone, then we are catching those people. So how do we remove them? Because we don't want to count them as tourists. They have never been on the ground, right? So these are the things that you have to think about. What type of phenomena this new data source that you are trying to reuse really brings. And it's also an aspect of collaboration and understanding between the data provider and the one who is processing the data. To have this relationship of asking questions, giving feedback, and this is a constant feedback loop that should go on in order to extract this information. So what the Statistics Indonesia did was they also wanted to validate how good is MPD. So they conducted some surveys, and based on those results, they were able to counteract some coverage issues that were present. They also concluded that there is no superior data source. There is just data sources that can complete each other if we allow them to. Final official statistics related example is census in Estonia. In Estonia, what we tried to do, as a lot of countries try to do, they want to go on register-based census, they want to go on combined census. But registries are very similar in this sense to privately held data because they are not created for the purpose of census. They are created for the purpose of something else. So you need to transform them, do something with them in order to make them compatible. And in Estonia, we have this problem that 20 to 25% of all permanent residents are actually not registered in population registry. They live in a different address. So this poses a problem for register-based census. And Statistics Estonia wanted to try out if there is an independent data source that can actually be used to pick the correct address from all of those different registers that were placed. So we conducted a panel study with volunteers. They all agreed to take part in it. We knew their actual place of residence. We had a set of places of residences from different registries. And we also had their home location calculated based on mobile positioning data. So this home location from MPD data was used to pick the correct location. So which registry will give us the most accurate answer for this person? Of course, this pilot project did not delve into the issues of how do we scale this up. So we now have 200, 300 people who are really willing to give this information. But if we want to do this in Estonia on the whole population, are they willing to do that? Are they willing to let us link the data from telecom operator with other registries? And I guess Estonia is slowly moving towards this to enable more transparency of how their citizens' data is being used. So we have the personal data tracker, where you can log in and see where or who has been querying your data, where has it been moved, and so on. So I would see that this kind of solution would eventually end up in such a tracker as well, but currently it is not used. It was a pilot project. So here I now reached the point where I can use these three examples of talking about data access and processing constellations. So we already talked about panel. So it's very, very good way approaching privately held data when you want to develop methodological solutions, when you really want to study it, when you really need a ground truth. So you have a panel of volunteers who are willing to provide answers to your questions. You can have a proof of concept that this method works. We can extend it to the wider population. The downside of this, it's a very small sample size, usually the same as with service would be. It's difficult to scale. So another way of accessing the data is national statistical offices access the raw data. So it is de-identified, pseudonymized, and transferred to NSO. The good thing about it is NSO has now full control of the data. So they can experiment on it, they can develop use cases themselves, etc. It does, however, require very strong commitment from NSO, especially from the aspects of privacy, enhancing technologies. Telecom regulation authorities most probably involved in this process as well. What you might expect to see is also batch uploads, lower frequency, the data flow might not be as good because somebody needs to transfer the data within certain intervals. So this now happened actually with Estonia, Bank of Estonia, where we get the data with a little bit of lag, but not enough lag to cause problems in statistical production. What Indonesia did was they were processing everything in NSO servers. So that means that data is not transferred. It's much easier to convince general public if they know that the data is still somewhere where it should be. This means fewer approvals are needed. There is a downside of if the MNO or telecom operator is the one who is processing the data, who is applying the methods, then you need to have a full understanding how do you check that this data is processed in a way that you expect it to be. How do you audit this process? There is also a possibility to create a sandbox for the NSO data scientists so they can work in MNO servers. They can interact daily with the people working for MNO. So it can create a good collaboration this way as well. So now to operational modalities of data reuse. Perhaps you already grasped this idea that there is no single operational modality that can be put into any context and it can excel there. It's really not possible because even when you go from country to country and you think about how citizens interact and understand the way this kind of data should be used, it can be very diverse, even in European Union. So if we are to choose something, we need to take into account every aspect, every stakeholder need in order to make this project work, because it's not only anymore the NSO, but there are much more people and stakeholders involved who need to gain from this project. And that's the most important thing. We all want to gain from it. So now I think when it comes down to establishing fit for purpose operational modalities, we need to think about also minimizing the costs, risks, and burden. So we cannot burden the data owner with our requests and just leave it there. They need to get something back. They need to understand what is happening to their data. They need to really understand what is the benefit of participating in such a project for them. And I have identified 4 main dimensions. Of course, there can be more, but today actually I'm going to be talking about, I've identified 4, but I'll be talking about 3 because I think the cost is, well, not so interesting. Anyway, data access, data quality, and roles and responsibilities are the things that you should be thinking about when you undertake such a journey. Cost as well, but I'm not going to be talking about it. So, what do you want to do with this data? Do you want to do a pilot project, or is it going to be a continuous production? Because if it's going to be a continuous production, time extension and time is of essence. You cannot lag. You really need to understand when will the data arrive, how much time will be left to apply quality assurance procedures to this data, etc. So you really need to think about the time. In case of pilot project, time is a little bit different matter. It perhaps isn't so important if the data does not arrive in your servers within a week or 2. It pushes the project deadlines, but it's fine. Continuous production is a different thing because a lot of different actors will be dependent on those statistical indicators. Then we start thinking about what is the purpose of this project. If it's going to be a new statistical product, or is it going to be a regular statistical product? So new statistical product, we should be thinking about how do we tackle the research questions? Who is going to be involved in tackling those questions? We want to explore the data. We want to dedicate time for data exploration and designing the data pipelines and methodologies. Then comes this data processing dimension. We talk about raw data or microdata, something that's very granular, something that is used for methodological development. If you opt for raw data, it gives you a bigger role, it gives you a bigger responsibility. It takes away responsibility from the data holder who is giving you the data, because now you are the one who is responsible for privacy matters. If you're going to opt for processed data, then how do you keep it transparent? How do you really understand that what you order is the thing that you actually get? What is the process that really builds up to this, that we can really, as a statistical institution, put our stamp on it and say that this is the right thing? Because a lot of the times, MNOs and privately held data owners, they already have their methodologies in place. And they might be not so happy to give time to develop a whole new data pipeline for statistical purposes. They might tell you that, guys, this is the thing that we have. You either use it or you don't. So it's a discussion point, of course, but it can happen. And finally, in this data access topic, on-site or off-site production. Again, you start to think about, if you bring this data to your premises, how do you govern this data? If you leave it to the premises of the data holder or other data or trusted intermediary, other government body, who is then responsible for the privacy matters? Who is guarding the data? So there should always be somebody who is responsible for important steps in the project. So process quality, I think this is very familiar to you, that it follows these quality of methods, quality of input, throughput, and output. And all of this data processing pipeline should have an overarching quality assurance framework attached to it. And what I want to reiterate here is you don't really need to delve into all these elements on this graph, but what I want you to take away from it is that a lot of these processes are actually iterative. So you receive the data, the raw data, you apply quality assurance procedures, you apply quality control methods over it, you discovered something. You need to give it back, ask questions, ask for corrections, do this over and over until you're happy with this, until you have everything that is there for you to say that this is the thing that can now proceed to the methodological phase. Because privately held data actually is, in a way, like a living organism. A lot of this data is produced for doing something, for network maintenance, for mobile network operators, for billing purposes. Once their technologies change underneath, there can be something new popping up in the data. So how do you discover this? And how do you give feedback? And how can this feedback be useful for the data owner as well? Because it's not so rare then during such projects, we actually discover something very, very interesting, even for the data owner, that they can use in their project, in their data management system to enhance their own operations. So, roles and responsibility perspective. I have brought out here 5 responsibilities: privacy protection, methodology development, methodology implementation and execution, auditing and approval, and integration. These are all elements of data processing and part of such a project. But one thing that I wanted to highlight here is that one thing that you should, as a national statistical office, never give away is the auditing and approval. This cannot be done by somebody else. If you are producing official statistical indicators, this is your thing. You need to give your stamp of approval here. Other things can be co-developed. You don't have to be expert in mobile data. You can give this development to somebody else. Say your requirements and co-develop something with them. You can trust them if you have this type of relationship. Same thing with privacy protection. There are so many different techniques for privacy protection provided by third-party companies that can be used. So you can outsource this type of knowledge and make it work for your project, but never for auditing and approval. Finally, I would like to talk about building trust and creating balance. And for this, I'm actually referring to an article that's written by my colleagues. And it's written after the wave of COVID. And during the time, many countries actually dabbled into using MPD data for trying to understand how these movement restrictions are actually adopted into society. And in some countries, it created a backlash. In some countries, it was okay. But nevertheless, it created a need for really trying to come up what are those principles that we always need to apply in order to maintain trust. So we always need to ask, is this method fit for purpose? Is it really serving the needs? Is it really serving the goal that we want to achieve? During this project, is the National Statistical Office able to retain professional independence? Are we able to ensure that the privacy is protected? Are we able to apply quality assurance methods in a way that it's really, making us trust the outcome? And are we able to internationally compare? Because if you start doing these projects in isolations, it only happens in your country, not anywhere else, then kind of gets into this trust territory again, where people start to ask, like, nobody else does it. Why should we keep doing that? We cannot compare. There is nothing, the value might be decreased because of that. So all of these principles are very good ones if you are able to maintain balance between them. Because not usually, but sometimes it happens that the fit for purpose for a project is asked at the very beginning of a project and never again throughout the project. Although during the project we might have taken important steps that might actually degrade the fit for purpose, meaning that if we choose to apply a privacy enhancing technique that completely renders this data set in a way that it's not usable anymore for the purposes that we really thought we are going to be using it. So should we keep going, or should we rethink what we are doing here? So keep questioning these things. Understand really what are you trying to achieve. So for me, I have this kind of method. How do I approach it? Is I try to think of it in terms of reality or reality model. For example, we have this very common term of a place of residence. It's very widely used. There is a good definition behind it. And now when I try to calculate this place of residence based on some other data set, so how does this differ from the reality model? And you can keep questioning it. If you apply different privacy enhancing technologies on it, does it change? Or will it remain the same? So I think these questions, reiterating again, they help you throughout the project to maintain this trust, to maintain focus, and finally achieve the goal. Last slide, I promise. I was asked, what would I tell you, students, if you're going to come and ask, what do I need to do to work with privately held data or reusing data? And I think my personal view in this domain is that there are myriad of different technologies. There are so many new emerging ways of tackling issues. I think national statistical offices, you don't have to be expert in everything, but you can bring in trustworthy partners with whom you're able to interact and collaborate. I would do you a huge disservice if I would start naming tech stack that I've been using, because it probably is irrelevant in 5 years. So there's no point in that. But if you want to collaborate, if you want to create synergy between different project partners, then you need to be able to communicate, co-develop, be agile, because data reuse definitely brings in new agile problems that you need to tackle very quickly. And very important thing is, how do you learn, or what is this common language? If you bring these stakeholders together, how do you make your problems understandable to the other who is not in this inner circle of statisticians? And how would they make their problems understandable to you? So this is the question that should be solved. And again, explain. Sometimes you really need to explain many times before you reach a common understanding. Thank you. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Kaisa, for that very interesting and insightful presentation. I'm sure there are plenty of questions in the audience, so please, if anyone wants to start, please raise your hand, and Katarina will pass you the microphone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. This was really super interesting. I will focus just on one area, but there are several other areas where it would be useful to follow up. And when you presented the different operational models for data access, and you have basically the inside the provider model versus the inside the statistical office model with pros and cons, I was wondering how much do you trust the developments in one area of privacy enhancing technology, the secure multi-party computation, where basically you could think of the data not moving anywhere and being processed in a privacy compliance mode by a virtual third party. So is there another model that would be emerging with help of technology in that area? That's the question.
Yeah, well, it could be fit in here. And I guess with these privacy enhancing technologies, what I've heard, sometimes people start to think of them as black box solutions where you put the data in, something comes out, and then they say the privacy is protected, but how do you make it sure that is? How do you make sure that the methods were applied correctly, etc.? So again, this is a modality that has a place and should be there, but you need to be able to communicate such a thing to general public, which is going to be a challenge because these methods are extremely complex. So how do you do that? That's a question. But for sure, we ourselves also tested this thing out in Indonesia. And I guess that was also kind of a question that arose there, that how do you know what will happen in that black box? What is happening with our data? So yeah, I guess it is part of a solution, but there are also some questions that needs to be answered with these technologies.
I have a question, maybe not only to the speaker, but also to the whole panel. My name is George Aklidis from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Are there any ideas and perspectives from Eurostat how to enhance the employability of the students, of the EMOS students? This is a crucial question because they feel, the graduates, that they are somewhat specialized in the area of statistics and official statistics. And I mean not only for a job in the private sector. And maybe a second question. There are some MSc theses which are very interesting and I could say novel. Is there any mechanism, any procedure in Eurostat to take care of these results and to apply them?
Thank you for that very interesting question. After the session, we will have a coffee break. So maybe the questions that are more broad and related to EMOS in general, we can also discuss them then or in the closing session. But for the time being, if there are any more questions related directly to Kaisa's presentation, please raise them now. Thank you.
Okay, I was first. Okay, thank you. Third time. Good afternoon. Kaisa, thank you very much for a very nice presentation. I'm working with data from mobile phones for almost 8 years, for the very beginning in Czech Republic. My question is, the first question, and then I will have some remarks. The question is, how is implemented this statistics to official statistics, which indicators you use in Estonia, because this is the first time I hear this, to include the data from mobile phones to or mobile operators to official statistics. And then a few remarks. Right now we are finishing a project in Czech Republic where we have data from completely, we have 3 operators and we have data from all of them, and we solve many methodological problems, I think similar as you did. And we know that data from mobile phones, and I'm very big supporter of data from mobile phones, but through the 8 years is a long time. I have found that it's very problematic to say that we are able to include it to official statistics. It's I think it's not a different discipline. It's completely different sport. Why? Because we still in official statistics we have some limits, like the difference between official residency and permanent residency. It's the problem which we solve in Czech Republic. We know that there is an official residency of people, what they have in their ID, and they have a permanent residency somewhere else. But during the year, and we ask it in a census, that's common. And there is difference between that. But why? Some of them, they have a clear reason why. For winter, they live somewhere. For some, they live somewhere else. I think many of your relatives, they have 2 or 3 places where they live, permanently live for a long time, not for 1 week or 2 weeks, and so on. I'm not sure I'm able to apply this where you are majority of your time. This is your permanent residency. I'm not sure. Because for some of you, some of us, permanent residency would be the workplace. Why? Because this is the place where I stay the longest time. Could you imagine a month where you have 4 weeks, where you have some place where you go for a weekend, you stay longer time, the longest time on one place you stay in your working place, on your working place. The problem with the mobile phone operators and this data is that we don't know anything about what you do there. We know where you are with very limited preciseness. We know only the area, which could be square 100 meters, could be square kilometers, and it's very limited. That's what we know. It could be applied in Czech Republic, in Estonia, it's everywhere, because the network of mobile operators works everywhere the same. So my question is how you apply it to official statistics. And my remark is I'm not sure that it's a way where we should go, because there are many other limitations, not only the privacy you mentioned. So I'm very big supporter, but very, let's say, reserved. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps I could take the same example of place of residence, which in Estonian statistical system is defined a place where you've stayed over 12 months and you've been present there at least 6 months, physically present there. And this is something that we use double layer model for that. We are calculating the home locations based on 1 month for each person. And home location is where you stay the evenings, where you stay weekends. But this is calculated not daily basis, but over a course of a month. So you get the idea behind it is that home and work time locations are the places where you spend most of the time, but they are, for most of the people, different in terms you sleep at home, you work somewhere else. So this is the first layer of model that we use, and then we apply the longitudinal model on top of that. And we start checking the 12 months, the moving window of 12 months to check, is this condition filled? Each month anchor point or home location that you have, is it detected over the course of 6 months or not? If not, then we are not able to assign you a permanent residence. If it is there, then we assign it. And that's how we do it. So we try to take these concepts and definitions that are already used and applied on the data. And also we try to then differentiate or bring out the differences. What are you losing or missing? As you said, there are things for people who perhaps are working nights. This whole model might not be good fit for them anymore. So there might be another solution that we need to think about. But mostly what it means for us is staying true to those definitions that are present. For example, for tourism statistics, we use international recommendation for tourism statistics, all the definitions there, and apply it on our data and on our methodologies.
I think we can take one more question and then move on to the coffee break. Thank you.
You, Andrea Randolini from the of Italy. Thank you, Kaisa. Very interesting talk, and I very much liked your motto, complete, not compete. I think that is the key point when talking about this data. But I have one, let's say, comment question for you. I think that there is one important issue that is in the background of your presentation, the use of this data, that is legislation. That has to do, of course, with privacy protection, that is clear, but it is not only that. At a certain point, you come across the point of how to enforce that privately held data can be used by statistical authorities, and that runs directly into the issue you don't want to talk about, that is cost. So should companies owning the data be reimbursed for what they do, for the service or for the data that they hold? But are they the owner of the data, or are the private citizens the owner of the data? So these are big issues. So that is a point. If you have comments, fine. But let me ask a specific question. When you talked about the very first example of it from Estonia, the project on tourism, you mentioned the Statistical Act of Estonia that was important. So in which sense it was important, that act? What was envisaged there?
Well, this gave a mandate for the Bank of Estonia to actually access this data set that was
this specific data, or more
yes,
generally?
This data set, because it was deemed relevant and important for the country. So that was how it was enforced. But I would say that back then, when we started, telecom operators didn't really, see it as a problem. They were willing to buy. We did not have to enforce them to give the data. It was more of a formal thing that needed to be in place. However, there are countries that are really interested in using this data, but they don't have this legislative framework in place, which means that when we go there and start to consult them, we oftentimes have to say that you need to change something in your legislative system. We cannot do anything here. So.
I will only react briefly on the legislation issue. So actually this is on the table now, because it's one of the points that is heavily discussed in connection with the a modification of the EU regulation on European Statistics 223. So there's a lot of things going on legislative terms. Sometimes also sector legislation may help. We have a case, for example, in the EU regulation on harmonized price indices, consumer price indices. There is a note that we used at a national level to get access to the scanner data for all retailing. So every single PIP in all major retailers is recorded for statistical purposes, which of course is a major breakthrough for the consumer price index and for the statistics, and it reduced costs at the end because we don't have to collect the costs in the field. So it is important, but there are things that we can hope for at least. in the European legislation. Also, there is a new regulation on how population statistics underway, and also there is an attempt to really create the best possible situation for accessing data for statistical purposes for annual census statistics, so to say, which can be another option. Of course, and the enforcement at the national level is not automatic. It's not easy. So there was a lot of negotiations with the retailers. There will for sure be a lot of negotiations with the mobile phone operators. They can coordinate nationally, and they are not usually particularly willing to share the data. That's true, but we should try. Otherwise, okay, I also see this is a supplement. This is not a replacement for the structural statistics. So sometimes I see that people think we don't need a census because we have mobile phone data. This is not the case, and this will not ever be the case, I think. So I miss a bit that there are no results, because I think we could clarify what kind of outputs you are actually creating, but then that we are more sure and clear what we are talking about. Otherwise, this is an important area. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Sorry, maybe I'll take the opportunity of this exchange on the legislation to give a bit of a brief update on what we are doing in the European statistical system, and also ask for your help. So indeed, as it has been said, the legal framework is very important. Kaisa was part of a group of experts who gave advice to the European Commission on how to make access to privately held data sustainable. Sustainable means the different things that you mentioned, Kaisa. So not only sustainable in terms of permanent, but also regulated, cost-effective, privacy compliant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what Eurostat is doing in collaboration with member states is to look at how the current framework regulation on statistics, Regulation 223 of 2009, can be revised in a way that this access to privately held data can be sustainable. And we are expecting to land a proposal by the beginning of next year, so in the first quarter of 2023. In time for this cycle of the Commission and Parliament and Council to discuss it in due time. Now, where we need your help is that as part of our due diligence process, whenever we do an exercise like this in the Commission, we launch a public consultation where we are asking stakeholders in general to tell us whether the direction in which we aim to revise the regulation makes sense, and what kind of aspects, including cost, for example, or legal constraints, etc., should be taken into account. And this public consultation is open until the 25th of October. So there is ample time for you all, and also for the stakeholders with whom you are working, to have a look at this consultation and contribute to the discussion, because as it's been highlighted, this is a fundamental aspect. And Albert will give you the details of where to click, but basically it's the Have Your Say portal of the Commission, and you can find in the Have Your Say portal the statistical framework regulation and provide your feedback there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Emanuele, for this intervention. We can all now go grab another cup of coffee and come back refreshed at 3:30 for our final session on open source software. Thank you so much.
Put this on the screen. I will try to find it with what Emanuele just talked
For
of.
the browser you need
Yes.
Okay, so we start again now with the next session. That is, think about like a roundtable on open source software for official statistics, experiences in teaching to EMOS students. So it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator and the two speakers of the session. So the moderator is Pamela Rafferty. She is head of statistical training at the Central Statistics Office in Ireland. Earlier in her career, Pamela was responsible for the EU Survey on Income and Living Conditions before moving to the methodological division in the CSO. It was here that she developed a deep interest in statistical training. She leads the work at CSO on the development of their statistical training framework and established the statistical training unit to support this work, and which she now leads. The CSO has just taken the decision to move to open source software, and of course she was very happy to when we asked her to moderate this session. And of course, as you may already know, Pamela is also a member of the EMOS board. So for this session, we have also two speakers, and then of course we'll open also the floor for the audience. So the first is Mark van der Loo is a senior researcher at Statistics Netherlands. His research interests include statistical computing and data processing, from fundamentals to application. Mark published several popular R packages and is currently in the editorial board of the R Journal. At Statistics Netherlands, he is responsible for the curriculum of the internal CBS Academy, the Dutch participation in the European Statistical Training Program, as well in the EMOS program. And also, as a speaker, we have Alexander Kovarik. He is the head of methods at Statistics Austria, within more than 10 years of experience working at National Statistical Institute. He is an active contributor also to the R open source community, with a focus on official statistics application. So I'll leave the floor to Pamela to start the session.
Thank you, Katerina. And as Katerina said, it's a very interesting topic. The move to open source software by NSIs isn't unusual for the CSO in Ireland. I know many of my colleagues in other NSIs have made that move or in the process of that move. So a really interesting topic here today. And our first presentation is from Mark, and it is free and open source software in EMOS and official statistics. So I'll give you the floor, Mark. Thanks.
I hope they're not coming for me. So thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak about one of my favorite topics, the use of open source. I will start quite broadly, then move a little bit to teaching and connection to EMOS, and end with a sort of wider perspective as well. Yeah, so I think I was already introduced, so I will skip this. But indeed, I coordinate the participation of EMOS of the CBS, and I've done a lot of teaching in the past year in several fields. So I'm generally very interested in education in statistics. So I want to start with a quote from a paper that appeared already in 2010, a paper by our core member Duncan Temple-Lang and statistics education professor Deborah Nolan, who works at Stanford University. And they sort of opened their paper by saying it's clear that computing is an essential skill for statisticians and anybody working with data. And then they go as far as saying computing is as important as mathematics. So are there any good old-fashioned methodologists in the room that are now thinking, no way? Right. So I think this is true, and I was very happy to find people writing this down so explicitly. Maybe it's interesting to know that Deborah Nolan was on the National Science Foundation Committee in the US, who defined the standard curriculum for data science. And of course, if you look at their definition of data science, it's very close to what we do. So that was very influential work, and they started thinking about it 4 years earlier. So, and in this paper, they go on actually by defining what fields of computation are interesting. So that's still an interesting paper to read. So that's general statistics. How about computing in official statistics? So this is the GSBPM, this picture. Does everybody know the GSBPM? Yes? So anybody not know GSBPM? Also fine. So it's a list of things we do in a statistical office. Basically, every box is one of those things. And I went through the exercise for an invited paper in the IAOS to go through the GSBPM and see where is computing important for us. I mean, we all have the feeling it's a sort of core activity, you know, manipulating data. And I focused on, you know, computing with data and categorize it a little bit to analysis and building. And is it a supporting activity or a core activity? But the main takeaway from this picture is that, yes, computing is extremely important to us. Computational skills pervade the office from beginning to end. Whether it is about designing how you collect data, or when you create output or dashboards, you're also always computing with data. But I think it's nice to see it explicitly. And in this paper, I also, as a sort of polemic idea, also define or propose a bachelor's degree in official statistics. So not just a master's, but I thought we might not do a bachelor's, you know, like 3-year education, teach all the basics, and then like demography and economy and statistical principles. So if you want to have a discussion about that, I invite you to take a look there as well. So that's computing, but then there's a question like, why would we, why FOSS? I'll come back to that later. I'll first want to say something about teaching. So in everything I've been teaching in the last 10, 12, 15 years, I've always used programming in exercises. And I'm not an expert on like pedagogical methods and models, but this is an old model from the 1930s that you still find in many documents or referenced very often. So it's Kolb's learning cycle, where he says there's 4 phases in learning something, and 2 of them are about experiencing and experimenting with a topic. And 2 other ones are about reflecting about what you did and conceptualize that, like summarize it into something that you can relate to later. And I try to do this in my classes. So I give people the chance to experiment a little bit with a tool, something very simple, some technical experiments. Once they learned that, I ask them, okay, now take one of your own data sets, for example, or otherwise I give them a slightly more complicated data set, and then I ask an open question. Like if you do something with data management, you can say, how many people voted for this party in that city, right? If you have like these election data, for example. And then after that, I ask them, how did you get to that answer? And can you show it to the group, right? So I let me do a round, and one person will like show what he or she did. And then one of the other ones will ask questions and comment. And you have the same, you know, compare solutions. It's very typical in programming. There's always more solutions to one question. And the best solution, I always say, is the one that you understand and can maintain, because you're probably going to be the person that has to take care of those chores. So I was asked a question last week in a conference on teaching statistics, like, can we teach statistics quicker using programming and more efficiently? And I would say yes, but there's a very strong condition. Programming should not get in your way. You should already have some computer literacy, like you should know what a file is, where to find it. You should know what a command line interface is. You should be sort of like, have seen those kind of concepts, variable assignments, if-else statements. That should not be new to you, because otherwise, before you start learning the statistics, doing exercises, you first have to pile up all these new concepts. And by the time you've done that, you're exhausted and no statistics fits in your head anymore. So you should teach it separately also. You know, basic concepts should be taught separately from the statistical concept, in my experience. Okay, so programming is important. It has an important role to play in teaching as well, conditioning on just what I just said. But why should we use free and open source software in official statistics? Because you can also buy commercial software, as we all know. Well, suppose you start a new statistical office and you look around. You can go to this website, awesomeofficialstatistics.org. It's a so-called awesome list. That's an internet phenomenon where people have a curated list of their favorite things. In this case, it's a curated list. of favorite open source software for creating official statistics. And we cover, basically, because I'm one of the people behind it, Alex is another one, and my colleague Olaf Ten Bos another one. There's 150 free and open source software packages, most of them in R, some in Python, and there's some Node.js and Java. And you cover basically everything. If you compare the slides here, you see there's a little bit missing in the corner, maybe, but those are places where you need very general tools like Python itself or R itself. And this is just not on that list. We talk about R packages. So I think you can do basically everything with open source software. So that's already one condition, right? I mean, you can say we want to use it, but it has to be there. And I think it's there. So why use FOSS? Well, there's some practical considerations here. I mean, we noticed already for the last 8 to 10 years that new hires, graduating students, they all learned R. Years ago, people would come from university learning SPSS in the Netherlands a lot. We have a strong SPSS tradition, say, in several universities. SAS not so much. But now everybody comes in, where can I find R? You know, it's just a question. So either you teach them, you know, your local proprietary system, or you give them this free tool and let them use that. So you have this huge wave of people that are already used to this. I heard in the conference I visited last week, well, online, that 60% of methodological papers now come also with an R implementation. Right? So if you want to try the latest, greatest techniques, you can probably just download a package and try it. I think it's a huge boost for collaboration with other NSIs. I mean, if I want to collaborate with one of you, we just open a GitHub and we start programming in a tool. We don't have to talk to our, you know, financial people. Can we buy licenses? Can we install those extra packages? They'll cost money. You can just get started. And it's, you know, free as in free beer. So usually FOSS doesn't cost any money. But I would like to emphasize also in the context of EMOS, using open source software is not without responsibility. And I think this is something we can also teach EMOS students, like to also become a part of the open source culture. If you see something weird in the documentation, for example, it's very easy to open a ticket on GitHub and ask them, I see there's a spelling mistake, here's a pull request, I fix it for you, or I just point out that the documentation over there is not very clear. It's very easy to start contributing. And I think personally, as an official statistics community, we should not only take from the open source community, but we can also contribute both in very big ways like building packages and things like that, but also just as a culture doing small things whenever you think it's possible. So that's the practical side. Then I think there's an ethical side as well. I mean, we all are bound legally to work through the European Code of Practice, Statistical Code of Practice. You're required to be open and transparent, and it certainly helps to use open source software there, right? I mean, you can, down to the last bit, investigate how your data is being processed. It's very clear. So that helps being accountable, reproducible. And this is what's called free as in free speech. So on the right or on the left, you see Richard Stallman shouting his FOSS liberties. Okay, so that's kind of zooming out again, and let me end with a little bit more like personal story. Because as somebody with a physics background, I took the opportunity to visit the birthhouse of Galileo Galilei, who of course also taught in this very university. So we are sort of standing on his shoulders in a sense. Now he was born in 1546 in February, and in that time, when he went to school, when he went to university, the authority in all things natural science was Aristotle, right? And that was sanctioned by the church, I think, in the 3rd century or something like that. So you go to university, people tell you, read Aristotle, and everything you see, try to explain it in those terms. And Galileo was not the kind of man to accept authority for what it is by law, right? He did experiments, very accurate, very small, and very convincingly showed that Aristotle was wrong in many cases. And we all know at great personal cost. He was imprisoned for a large time of his life. But I think the takeaway is, because we are also national statistical authorities established by law, right? But we should not rely on that for our authority. And that's where openness can help, right? Open software, open data, open standards, being transparent in how we work, why we work, where we get our data, what we publish, when we try to publish it. And open software is just one aspect in there, but an important one. So that's something we can take away also from Galileo, I think. And I just want to end with one remark, because as I was taking the picture, I noticed, I don't know if you can see it, but somebody had the idea of putting a beer on top of this orb that he's holding. And at first, being an admirer of Galileo, I was kind of offended, like, why does somebody desecrate this statue with putting a beer there? But then it occurred to me, he kind of earned it, didn't he? Yeah, putting his life on the line for science and the scientific method, and a huge influence. So in terms of open source, I would just want to invite everybody to also earn that beer, like Galileo did. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. That was really interesting. And so was the glass of beer. I didn't know if you had seen it or not. I was going to ask you about it. Then the next presentation, quite similar in title, but a different, I suppose, angle on it, is free and open source software, or in our statistical office, why? So Alex is going to give us this presentation, and then we'll have some questions and discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm talking about similar things and a little bit different things, so I might skip a few slides that are repetition to the previous presentation. I'm also talking a bit about computing in the statistical production and statistical office. Learn from depth of experience, so from IT developments from the last decade or a little bit more maybe, and why does that motivate us to use open source tools for our developments, our production. So we've seen that a lot of computing is happening in the statistical office, and traditionally they are split between IT methodologists and subject matter experts. And also the skills are dominated by these groups. So IT development skills are mostly in the IT department. All this mathematical, numerical, statistical skill set is with methodologists, or the main part of it is supposed to be with methodologists. And the expert knowledge in the field is for subject matter experts. So nowadays, there are people who need skills, of course, from all the fields, because when my former boss already retired, starting working at the office, he just wrote down on paper, I don't know, the sample should be this and that, and use stratification, build up a variable and the numbers. So he just sent the letter to IT and they had to implement it. Of course, nowadays, that does not happen. So it either happens in the methods unit or even in the subject matter unit. So kind of all of these skills are needed by persons doing statistical production nowadays. And a recent development in the research community is this research software engineering. And that's something that is, I think, quite close to persons we are quite keen on getting into our office. So persons that have IT skills, that have some mathematical skills, and then they have expert knowledge in a certain field. So obviously not, sorry, in all the fields we are producing statistics, but in some of them. So I put a link to it. That's interesting. I have another view of the GSBPM. And the faces are the same, or at least they should be the same, but I'm quite sure they are. So, but the main thing here is that different phases. So there's the work phase and the change phase, and the work phase is repetitive, so it's kind of you're producing maybe a monthly statistic, so you do that quite often, and the change phase is like a slower process. And I use Tick's picture because it looks more similar to the traditional DevOps picture. So the idea in some of you, or probably most of you, have heard the term DevOps. So in IT development, continuous development is continuous agile development is the thing you want to do nowadays, and also delivery or release of the software product should happen constantly, and monitoring, configuration, so they all should combine. And so development and operations, that's what DevOps stands for. And there is a list, or there are several lists of principles, of ideas for a DevOps process, how it should be implemented. And I went through this list and tried to kind of translate that into our statistical production process, because a lot of the things you need to produce a software product are similar to produce a statistical product at the end. So one thing is automate everything. I put as much as possible in the bracket. So the idea is that you have continuous integration and continuous delivery, so that you kind of write a code, push it somewhere, and then everything happens automatically. Also for a data processing pipeline, because that's basically what we do. We have kind of input data, and we have scripts that do things in between. And at the end, we have a table as a quite simple result. And if you change one of the components, you can just run the whole thing again. It should give you a new table. So if you update the data to a new month, you just run the process automatically, and it should produce a result. So the idea is that, of course, you can quickly update your results. If you update the data, or if you improve the methods, it's easy to get to the final results. And everything we do, so data science, machine learning, statistical methods, so basically the green bubbles on the plot from the GSPM Mark showed can be automated, or most of it should be automated. Then there's unit testing in software development, but we can also unit test software components we use, of course, but we can kind of change that a bit to observing quality dimensions. So I just put here plausibility checks for the data, so kind of automated data editing to some extent. So either just checking and flagging values, or actually editing the values. So there should be quality controls in this automated process throughout the process. And of course, you still can have, that's what was in the bracket, almost everything. You still need manual intervention, probably from time to time. So I put it like an extreme quality event. So if you kind of see a COVID crisis happening, you might want to actually look at the data yourself, if everything is correct, because the change is more than whatever, like more than you would expect from previous observations. Foster continuous improvement is also a big thing of DevOps development, so that you are agile in a way that you can quickly improve the whole product. And one of the things is modularity. So you write code, or you produce a module that does something in your process, and you can just quickly update that to a new method. You can add a new data source, you switch software tools. And for that, it's also important to integrate the teams. So probably you will not have one person running that, but it's still, the split is still, oh yeah, that's not me. The split is still statisticians, subject matter experts, and developers, but they are together in one team. Like they have this DevOps meeting and DevOps teams that are there. It's mostly developers and guys running the system behind it. And in our case, it could be the different roles we have in the office. Another important part in our production, of course, is being reproducible. And that's also something that is facilitated by setting up the process in such a way. So not just putting your code into a repository, but also having a data generation process, transparent, and versioning the data that comes to your office or that you produce. And if there's a need to use a graphical user interface for some steps, for example, for data editing, so you have manual editing by data clerks, that they should somehow produce code in the end, and that's the result that you kind of put as a module in your process. And it's not a one-time thing, they click and nobody exactly knows. You cannot just repeat this process. So there are some principles, there are more principles, and but there are some of them. So what tools do we need for achieving that? So we need some kind of code-based statistical software. We need version control. We need a pipeline tool. We need some storage to deploy artifacts to. I just mentioned R packages and web applications here. And the good news is all of that is kind of freely available as open source tools. So of course you can have Git. Git is open source. You even to host a GitLab is quite easy. There's GitLab CI, for example. There's Jenkins, what we are using at our office, which is also open source. And also for the storage of to deploy artifacts to, we use Artifactory, for example. That's one tool, but there are many tools. So all of the tools are here available. You don't need to buy anything. And of course, a code-based statistical software that is easy to use is, for example, R. That nicely integrates into the process. So that's one motivation. So if you want to set up a nice production process in a DevOps kind of way, there are open source tools that facilitate that quite straightforward. And the other motivation I want to give to use open source is one of the projects, not one project, but several projects. Since 20 years ago, at least, I'm not sure when the first one was, about the development of SDC tools. So the CBS and other contributors started off with developing myArgus and tauArgus at some point in time as a closed source software. So first time we had kind of shareable tools to do SDC, but it was not open source. So you could run it on your Windows machine, but you could not compile it for Linux or just change the code yourself. Later on, this software was also published as open source. So they kind of refactored the code and made it a bit easier for outside contributors to use the code. So it was published as open source. In parallel, so before it was open sourced, colleagues of mine at Statistics Austria developed two R packages that kind of mirror the functionality of myArgus and tauArgus, because we did not want to use a graphical user interface for it. We wanted to do it directly from R. So we developed that. And then there has been projects, so the methods of the two converge and produce the same results, because nowadays both ways, so myArgus, tauArgus, SDC Micro, SDC Table, are the standard SDC tools of the ESS. So that was an achievement, and now the promising example is the newly implemented methods in SDC, target record swapping as an example. It was actually implemented as a C++ library, and it's used by both SDC Micro and myArgus. So if you implement it in a way that it could be used by others as well. And for the R packages, I put it there. That's where I know it, because I'm a co-developer as well. So we had contributors from outside the project to SDC Micro, especially. We had worldwide usage, so we get questions from all over the world for the package and issues and sometimes also pull requests. And there are now already R packages using the STC micro and STC table package. So it kind of, it helps that others use your software, of course, and kind of test it. I might skip the examples of software. So that's kind of assigning the software available to GSPPM steps. And maybe come to the last one. So there are, you already saw the awesome list before. Of course, if the tools are open source, it's easy to use them, but you also to contribute to them or modify them. But what's also important is this like working together, collaboration, social interaction. So there's, at least for the R part of R in official statistics, there is quite a community already developed in the last 10 years. So we are also running a conference that is called the Use of R in Official Statistics. And you have a community there. You can you have like a forum where you could present results from for example, EMOS master thesis, if it's related to R in official statistics. That's like a community where you could present it, and we kind of hoping for contributions also from this from EMOS students. And they actually already, we had presentations already by EMOS students in the past, in past iterations of the conference. Yeah, thank you. That was my contribution to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Alex. Another really interesting presentation. I can tell you that our decision to move to open source was not very noble. It was really to do with the cost of SAS, and also that the new recruits coming into the organization had R and Python, and we were ignoring that and upskilling them in SAS and costing ourselves quite a significant amount of money to upskill them. So different reasons, but it's very interesting. So we'll open the floor to any questions. I don't know, does anyone want to answer the question about a bachelor's degree in official statistics, or maybe we've enough on our plate with the masters at the moment. But if anyone on the floor has any questions, if you want to raise your hand, Katerina will pass you the mic. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Maya will pass you the mic.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the presentations. I agree with both of them. My name is Elena. I work, come from Spain. I work in Spain, but I also teach at the EMOS Master at the Complutense University. And I teach with a colleague of in Spain, David Salgado. Some of you may know him. And what we try, we teach production in official statistics, and what we try is to, as Alex mentioned, is to try to build capabilities on subject management, IT, computing, and also statistical methodology. For the computing part, we use the awesome list, so thank you very much. And but there is something that we miss, and it is some kind of data, okay? Not real data, because of course, because of confidentiality and so on, it's not possible. But I don't know, and this is, well, this links with the training material, if it would be possible, some kind of repository of synthetic data or something like that. Data and metadata, of course, because of metadata is really important. And of course, this repository should be somehow linked to the awesome link. So this, I think this would be, at least in our opinion, it would be quite important for the students. And then I've got another comment, and it's at the Complutense University. We've got training courses where we invite some kind of NSI European expert. These courses are related to computing plus statistical methodology. And these courses are attended not only by EMOS students, but also NSI staff in Spain staff. It's a good way to share knowledge, to share, you know, and I don't know if maybe Eurostat could be interested in implementing some kind of courses like this one for EMOS students and NSI staff and so on. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think that NSIs might need that type of training as we transition, because we've got a legacy of SAS programs which we now have to try and figure out. But I don't know, does anyone from Eurostat want to say anything about providing data, or Albert? So it's providing metadata and data, maybe synthetic data for EMOS students to analyze.
Well, as part of the provision of data for research purposes, we have also, I think, a part of whereas the data provision, some data stored, which is in principle synthetic data, or very much processed data that it is probably not usable then for official statistics purposes, but for teaching purposes is there, so that we call them public use files then, for example. So there is a certain offer already there. Of course, if there is an additional demand on that, there's a lot of discussion as well on synthetic data. I think then in the statistical community, so we can take it up and note it down, also to discuss further possibilities in doing that. But this very much depends on the demands. There was another question on the EMOS students and NSI stuff. Yeah, I know. Okay, now, this is part, I think, of the package of this study that we would like to launch if there is a demand for that. So a part is that extending EMOS to beyond then the EMOS students, also to educating then staff at NSIs, because we see that there is a need, of course, for new skills then coming into the NSIs, but also a need for training of existing staff there. And this will be treated as part of the package there. Notwithstanding, of course, that there is also this offer on the European Statistical Training Program that we also offer then specifically then to staff of NSIs. But okay, in between these both EMOS and ESTP, I think we will also take a look on some joint courses for that.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, yeah, Alex.
For the first point about the data, I mean, they're of course the public use files, but they are like the final data set. I think what might be missing is synthetic data or any kind of data that correspond to the steps we actually take. So if you think of a survey that it's, I don't know, like the raw data, that first comes into the office from the survey system, that has all kind of like missings, implausible values, all these kind of things. I never worked on any kind of synthetic data set that has the problem still in it, but it would be interesting to do that, to kind of produce not just like Silk is for one example. You have a public use files for all the countries. I think you can just download it, but it's a final data always and not in between. But it would be very interesting to work on synthetic data sets for one public use file where you have the data generations in it. So that's quite interesting. Would be a nice project. And for the second thing, the courses, I mean, couldn't be the like ESTP courses combined with this EMOS program somehow. I mean, it's probably different contracts and everything. It's complicated, but I'm thinking about if you give an ESTP course in Pisa, then the EMOS students from here could just join, or maybe from other Italian universities that are close by as well. And it's an ESTP course, then it's actually also more community building, because then they actually meet more than their own country's NSI employees when they have an internship, for example. So I really like that idea.
And do we have the capacity to offer the EMOS students, because there is limited capacity on the STP?
Of course, we have a priority then to the stuff, because we have also demand. In principle, we have also demands then outside the statistical community, and also outside then the European statistical system in principle. But okay, all that I can currently say is that we will look at that, and then we'll take it up, and then come back then with an answer on that. I have to see if, okay, there might be some contractual problems and things like that, but we will come back to that.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add? We have another question, or two more.
Thank you. Thank you. I have one more technical question, because I will use the opportunity that there are free experts on data processing, because the number of code that we are working with is enormous. And for a while, we are playing with the idea of using more something that I would call the metadata-driven automatic code generation, which means that in the input, there is something that the substantive person understands, because this is structure specification. Then there is a intermediate layer which automatically generates tens of, sometimes hundred pages of code, and then there is an execution phase, because we are running out of capacity for programming, and it's also very difficult to keep the long programs documented. So my curious question is if you have some experience with that, or if you think that this is something that is promising in the long term from your point of view of someone who works with open source software, or whether you see also some space of this kind of optimization of working with video program code. And I'm sorry for the technical question, but that interests me.
That's okay. Okay, Mark?
Yeah, so I think this idea of like you specify the input metadata and the output metadata, and then everything is done. Yeah, that idea has been around. I think what we are doing at CBS is kind of an intermediate solution. What we're focusing on now, we have two large renewal projects or programs, really. One for the social statistics and one for the economic statistics. And the main starting point there is we want to modularize everything. So separate modules, everything has to be according to the business architecture, in 5 separate steps with all these intermediate, well-defined intermediate statistical products. And then we have this idea that, or the starting point, that everything should be rule-based. So we separate the subject matter knowledge. And so subject matter specialists should the only thing they should have to do is write down the rules how the data should be processed. They do not actually, the difference is, let me give a practical example. Currently, people might have a database and they write SQL code to sort data, to filter out dirty records, to replace values. And then all the subject matter knowledge is condensed, hidden somewhere in those endless files of SQL code. And what we want to do now is that people just write down a rule, like if you see this, then change that, and then have that processed. So it's not exactly that you specify input metadata and output metadata and everything is done, but it gives you more detailed control. But it also hopefully keeps you from doing very technical things with, memory allocation, where are the files, When are they going to the database? All these things are done for you. It's a difficult project. For some things like data validation, we have the engine around to do that. That's now used by, I don't know, 20, 30 different processes at least that I've been advising on. And that's the ones that I know. I know there are more. But then for processing data, we are still struggling there because mainly because we have so many data processing on so many different scales. So we have some statistics use like, I don't know, 10, 20,000 records, and it's quite easy process, quite simple steps. But for example, for the household income, there are thousands of rules. I think it's something like 6,000, 7,000 business rules, and 2,000 of them are updated on an annual basis. And we're talking about hundreds of variables, intermediate variables. So then you need a kind of system where you have debugging, you kind of want to compile the rules so they're executed efficiently. And so anything from the simple to those very complicated things we need to support. Yeah, that's still a bit of an open question, but that's something we are working on. So I would say, well, I would just say that's the choice that we made. I think if you want to specify input and output metadata, there's a lot of assumptions you have to make to create the code for the actual execution. Somewhere you will have to specify what's the method used, under what conditions you want to remove a record or update it, and so on. So in the end, you will have to make the same specification.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I think Emmanuel has a question.
Thank you. A question for Mark and Alexander. You have highlighted that one particular element of, let's say, moving more radically towards open source is that you open up to communities, you participate actively to communities. Now, the question I have is, what kind of mechanism do we have in place, or can we strengthen further to develop these skills and capacities within our organizations, which are by definition not that ready to do these things? And I was just thinking, and I was wondering what you think about it. I was just thinking about the cybersecurity world, where the best way to train people was to create opportunities like bugs bounty programs or simulation of attacks, where teams were collaborating with outsiders and they were, let's say, learning by doing. That is not, let's say, the way we offer training in the traditional EMOS program, ESTP, etc. But perhaps we should think of it as an effective way of let's say, adding an additional channel of capacity building. So I was wondering whether you have any experience or any views on that.
So I don't know about bug hunting for the official tools. Of course, would be an option. So you kind of make a bug bounty for not just for security issues, but also for statistical issues. But apart from that, I mean, most of the skill sets are present, I think, at the office. So I don't see like this big gap where we need to train a lot of our staff, especially the new hires not. We more have the problem that we kind of, in the Austrian case, that we hire new data scientists, they know R, they know Python, they produce a production system, and then they're kind of bored with the daily life at the statistical office. That they are sitting around producing, I don't know, something in national accounts, and they have to do that every quarter, and it's basically the same. So that's more our problem, to keep them somehow entertained, but somebody still has to do the regular production. So we try to kind of make the regular production easy and faster to have time available for more exciting tasks, not more important tasks, but maybe more exciting tasks. So I mean, we are also like a community for other things, maybe not so strong in software development, but we share our experience a lot about methodology. There are all these expert groups, user groups, working groups, which are not focused on exchanging tools or actual software things, but about exchanging ideas. So I think we're quite good in this community part. And we could also engage more with other communities. I mean, with EMOS, we are closely connected to academia, so that's a skill we already have, I think. You have more to add?
Yeah, now I had some time to think, so that's good. Yeah, so I think what you mentioned, or what you are alluding to, is kind of gamification in education, right? So like hackathons where you have teams competing with each other for, and then the best one wins a prize. And the thing with that is that it might also scare people off, right, from learning, because they think, oh, it's a match and only the best ones can enter, and I don't have that many skills, so maybe it's not for me. And then those people stay at home and they will not learn anything. So there's an alternative form that we have organized actually in the Euros conference, and that we're also planning to do internally. It's called Unconf. It's a concept that originated, like anything data science, in California, we would say, in our OpenSci community. And the idea there is that everybody in any skill level is invited to help work on open source projects. So for example, we could take some R packages that I and Edwin or Alex worked on. We will be there during that day. We have a list of things to do. There's always plenty of things to do in the software. Sometimes it's just updating documentation. Sometimes there's a bug. Sometimes there's a new feature. And depending on your skill level, we will help you do that implementation. And everybody goes home with the feeling, I contributed something to this open source project, increase their skill, and hopefully are encouraged to continue learning, right? Next time they come, they do something maybe more complicated. And this, I think, is a form that I really like, because it's much more open. You leave out the competition and you promote collaboration much more.
Okay, thank you. I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thanks very much to Mark and Alex for great presentations, and thanks for the engagement from the floor as well. Thank you.
Okay, yes, so I guess now it's time for the closing session. Just before, I want to remind to everyone who reserved for the dinner that will start 7:30 at the top roof of Grand Hotel Duomo. You all, maybe most of you are already staying there. Otherwise, you can find the direction on the EMOS events website. It's a walk, 10 minutes walk there, or of course you can ask us. And last thing, I will ask you when we finish, you can just stop a moment outside. We would like to take a picture all together. Okay, thank you. And now for the closing, we have Albrecht, you already know, and it's my pleasure to also introduce Monica, who I guess many of you already know, but Monica is full professor of statistics at the University of Pisa, and actually she's currently director of statistical production at Eurostat, and of course a member of the EMOS board. She served also as president of the International Association of Survey Statisticians of the International Statistical Institute. As a researcher, her interest includes small area estimation, poverty mapping, inference in elusive populations, no response in telephone and internet surveys, design effect in 15 statistical models. She was scientific coordinator of several research projects on small area statistics funded by the European Commission and by Italian Ministry of University and Research. So I leave the floor to you, Monica and Albrecht, for the closing.
Okay, so thank you, Caterina, but I don't want to say so much. So 3 take-home messages and 5 tools. This is what I have in mind for us as educating community for the European official statisticians of the future. So the take-home messages are, first of all, as we have seen in the video, official statistics is not just numbers. We must convince, everyone must be convinced of it. It's not just numbers, but it is us. And this is important because as a consequence, EMOS is, or should be even more, an open community, as inclusive as possible. So universities, I mean, all the universities are here to stay, but we need also to open to others. Then the other word, important word, word of the future is what Emanuele said this morning early. He said prosumers. So prosumers is the key word, according to me, and is a take-home message from today work. And this opens the issue of privately held data. But privately held data means that we have two kinds of actors, private businesses and civil society organizations. So are they the new other statistical authorities of the future? We have to keep in mind that National Statistical Institute plus other statistical authorities, but also plus private businesses and private civil society organizations in some way. So we need to build up data catalogs, and we need to accompany them with metadata as rich as possible, and we have to invest in the concept of interoperability. I am not a technician, but I think that from the previous presentations I have learned that interoperability is important, and also open data and open coding is another issue. So we need also electronic data interchange between civil society organizations and government institutions, maybe, and also between companies and government institutions. This calls for agreements, and this calls also to solve privacy issues, because statistics, official statistics, is for democracy, but everyone likes to be in some sense protected against the intrusion in private lives. And then another message is that data sources should complete, not compete. And this is what Andrea and you said. Complete, not compete. This is a change of mindset, a sort of revolution, both from the production side and the word, the other word, the word outside. In the production, I mean, in the production process, we tend to be organized like silos. Instead, if we want to complete, not compete, we have to integrate data. But this means that we have to integrate competencies. Computer scientists must work together with subject matter experts, but maybe computer scientists should be also subject matter experts, and subject matter experts should also know something more about coding, about interoperability, and these concepts. So according to me, for this revolution in mindset, we need obviously to cooperate with universities, and we are here to stay. I mean, we are in the academy world, where new ideas and students can be educated. But this must be done, but with an overarching element, that is rethinking of foundations. And when I say foundations, I am referring to the legal frameworks. Okay, so this new legal framework, a new statistical law, maybe can also influence a new code of practice. New, not different than, but maybe a refreshed one. Okay. And this is the overarching element. Then on this overarching element, cross-border mobility opportunities for the students are welcome, because obviously everyone can take advantage from the knowledge of what is going on in another country inside Europe. But this is going to attract students, give an European flavor, but we must keep in mind privacy issues are different from one country to the other. So if I am growing up as official statisticians, I must be aware that I need to refer to a legal framework that is common to Europe and a national framework that can be also, in some sense, not different, but more specific or whatever you want. Another tool, so cross-border mobility, another tool is job market. Job market, I must say that EMOS label from now on should have or must have a value in the hiring process by statistical agencies. I have the French model in mind and also the Irish English model in mind, but in any case, we should give the values to this stamp in the hiring process and also in the career process. This call from an advocacy action from Eurostat. Otherwise, we are not going to succeed. And I am talking because I have experience of it, okay? So this advocacy from Eurostat should be something to do also in the university world. What I mean is that in the teaching side and in the research side, in both sides of activities in the university, since now EMOS has been something coming from a bottom-up process. Just to make an example related to Pisa, Caterina, I, Gaia, Francesco, and others were involved in the EMOS, and Lorenzo Corsini is involved yet, and then our department is involved, and then we are here now, bottom up. But I think that times are mature for a sort of top-down advocacy action by Eurostat, calling directly the rectors of universities, saying, okay, we are in Europe, Eurostat is, we need to do, please open the door to initiatives if you want, the initiatives are, and so on. Maybe the scientific communities can be involved also by scientific associations. International Statistical Institute is worldwide, but there are European Statistical Association. There is FENSTAT, there is National Statistical Societies. Why not to do a sort of call for them to cooperate in some way? Also to promote PhD programs, because we are at Master of Science program, but there is also the PhD level in the Bologna process. So we need to do maybe something more also there. And then for what concerns teaching, we have done teaching materials. I have seen that the economic and financial statistics are also well taught, I would say, but in the learning materials we have contributed to produce here in Pisa, we focused on, I would say, learning outcomes related to methodologies, in quotes. Maybe the example done by the cooperation between official statisticians and banks at the bank sector on economic and financial statistics is another kind of example on a topic, on a specific topic. Why not SDGs as a whole, as a specific topic? So we have many specific topics, and maybe we should also start to invest also in how to produce official statistics in a specific field. And then, close to reality, clean data sets are useless to learn. We need dirty one with missing values, need of impute values, and so on. And this is another part, a very difficult one, because it's easier to simulate clean data than dirty data. But to learn and to teach, and also to upgrade abilities and skills in the staff involved in official statistics, we need also this dirty data. And then finally, Next Generation EU is more than a recovery plan. I think that you are aware of it. And I say that it is more because it is something that allows us to do a sort of jump towards the defense of cybersecurity, for instance, or the building up of in-house private, in quotes, companies inside national statistical authorities. But this opened the window to many problems. I come back to the code of practice and to the statistical law to be revisited in some way. And then also this made me may be also read as a sort of new approach that will give also the possibility to the respondents. You know, the respondents, they are the basic in traditional data collection process, but these respondents are becoming data donors. Citizen-generated data are very common now. They are collected by meters, and day by day we are accumulating a sort of treasure that then we need to use for producing official statistics. So these data donors, this active participation of citizens from respondents, more passive if you want, to data donors, we need to make a bridge, and this bridge can be done, according to me, by this overarching element that is the legal framework. And inside this, I think that there is an open space where EMOS can do a lot, and I hope that together we will be able to do like this. So many thanks.
Okay, thank you. There's not that much left to say, I have to say, after this comprehensive closing statement. What I would like to say is that obviously I have the impression that we are starting or doing the rethinking at the right time. I think that there is an overwhelming demand, I think, for that. Going into different directions, and I think that is also triggered through what we can see, that it is a complete overhaul of official statistics or statistics in general, that is then triggered by these new data ecosystems that are created and which have quite a lot of consequences on the system of official statistics and how this is taught, and the skill set are necessary, how these data are integrated into the portfolio of official statistics, what are the methodologies. We heard about the open source as a new approach to do this, to co-produce and to have a span out then official statistics to new stakeholders and then collaborate with those stakeholders. I think this is a clear sign that quite a lot of activities are necessary that lead to a complete rethinking of the system and the role of official statistics then as well in the future in this data ecosystems. Having said this, we of course cannot do everything, so we are starting, or we are doing these reflections there. For example, for the e-learning materials there, I wanted to mention this, that there is also an EU Academy, a site where training materials can be stored and be used, which is an offer by the European Commission. So there are some activities that are not necessarily related to statistical offices, but we can also use then other developments that are there for our own purposes. We saw that there is some rethinking and contemplation necessary how we do the education and the trainings. There is a demand for closer collaboration then between statistical offices and universities, also to train students, but also then staff of universities, probably doing this together, finding possibilities of probably also working together, doing some solution, what we just heard with the open source software, and well, training camps or camps doing programming then together. We had quite lively discussions then on the exchange of students. I think that we started now this cross-border exchange program. The takeaway that I have is that communication is needed. So communication to communicate then to potential users, so to statistical offices, to universities, to students, that this is a possibility, but also communication among these stakeholders to optimize the program and then also put it into the curriculum of EMOS. We also see that there are more collaboration probably between universities, common or double grades then, for example, could be more conceived, common degrees could be thought of. We see as well concerning the integration of privately held data that there will be quite some discussions about the way of doing this. How does it fit into the portfolio of official statistics? What is necessary to be able to integrate it? What kind of partnerships are necessary with the academia to get the necessary skills, but also to create new ideas and so on, to advance then existing procedures at NSIs, but also then with private companies. I think it will be very difficult to explain to our colleagues at Eurostat that they should produce dirty data. So, but I've heard the plea for it, and I think that also for the training purposes that we surely will take this up. For the legal framework, that is always a bit in the background. So we are, as Emanuele already announced, we are doing we are proposing a revision of the European statistics regulation, so the basic framework law of statistics, which is taking place in a not an atmosphere, but in a number of activities, especially by our colleagues from DG Connect, which have to do with regulations on data. So the Data Act, the Data Governance Act, for example, should be mentioned, where there is more legal rules then on the use of data. And we are trying then to fit the revision of the statistics regulation into this frame set, but also collecting needs for updating the different parts of the regulation and putting this then into the current system. And for that, for the regulation itself, Emanuele already mentioned, there is currently an open consultation, where we probe then our ideas for changing, for the revising this legislation with the public. In principle, everybody can participate. We are distinguishing between users, data producers, data holders, and so on, in order to get some directions where we can go with our proposals, but also for having support then for certain changes in the legislation. Therefore, it's quite important and also to participate into that. And I would like to go to the computer here to put this on. Oops. I think. Oops. Okay, now. I think it's this one here. So when I, before lunch break, when I took a look, it was 61 replies. Now it's 63 replies. I don't know whether somebody felt already then motivated to do a reply, but I do it in, I put the English version. So there was, in principle, a call for evidence on an impact assessment already, where we explain the broad objectives that we want to follow up for changing the law. Where is it? And then we are now doing a more concrete consultation where there is a questionnaire behind of getting more detailed than opinions on the different aspects of changing the revision. So please feel free to participate into that. Okay, with this, I think we have quite a lot of feedback from this workshop. I would like to thank you for the real lively participation there, with a lot of questions that were asked then to the panels, and also a lot of issues that were brought up that we take home then for reflection. We will have tomorrow a board meeting where we can have a first discussion on certain issues, but it will surely be necessary to reflect a bit more substantive on different proposals that were brought up here, and also see what kind of opportunities we can have for the further development of the EMOS program. But this is our will then also to take a step and to take a next step then for the development of the EMOS program itself. So thank you, and I probably also want to say last year we had only then the online workshop. I think this year it showed that the many talks that we had as well in the breaks, that is really useful, that producing ideas as well. So I'm looking also forward to continuing the fiscal ones. We will also reflect on opportunities, because we are organizing quite a lot of conferences as well on opportunities of including as well aspects that with collaboration with universities in the context of EMOS, also in the future into these conferences and workshops that we are organizing. Okay, with this I would like to thank you. Would like to stop here. Okay, a big thanks to the organizers of the conference, University of Pisa, to my colleagues for making this happen. So, and also, obviously, you attended the church before because of the nice weather that we have. It was really a pleasure coming from a bit north with the autumn that we already experienced here. It's coming back into the summer. So thank you.